hit critical mass, and I want to be super respectful of everyone's time. So we are going to go ahead and get things started. First things first, I just want to welcome everyone to Pro Bono and Nonprofit Boards. This virtual event is part of Taproot Foundation's 2021 US Pro Bono Summit. And it's made possible in part due to support from our summit leadership sponsors, PwC and RBC. We're grateful to PwC and RBC for their commitment to really bringing together leaders from across sectors throughout the US 2021 Pro Bono Summit virtual series, as we all explore together how collectively the ecosystem of pro bono can come together in support of social change organizations and small businesses. We're glad that you could all join us today as part of this summit. So why are we joined together for this session specifically? It's hard to overstate the importance of a strong board of directors is for the long-term success of a nonprofit. In addition to guiding the organization through change and building the strong systems to withstand future challenges, if your nonprofit's board of directors is representative of the community that you're serving, it can also act as a vital sounding board when making programmatic or leadership changes. Despite the importance of maintaining a strong board, board development and recruitment is unfortunately one of the most underutilized areas of business pro bono that Taproot sees. So we're out to change that. And so here's our agenda for today's event, as we'll cover a couple different facets of how we can change this collectively. So first of all, we're going to cover how a fully functioning board and a resource-raising nonprofit board operates. We'll also be joined midway through the presentation by nonprofit board leaders for a panel conversation that covers topics ranging from board effectiveness to tips for pro bono usage. And then finally, we'll be sharing examples and best practices for using pro bono to build and develop your own nonprofit's board. So as we get things started, just a few quick introductions from the Taproot team, since you all have been so kind in introducing yourself in the chat. I'm Kimberly Swartz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm Taproot's Senior Manager of Community Engagement. And I'll be acting as a moderator throughout the event, so helping with some of the logistics and the conversation organization throughout. So on the note of logistics, folks will be muted throughout the presentation. So if you do want to interact or add feedback or ask questions of Taproot or our guest speakers who are joining us later, please use the chat box or the Q&A function to do so. We will try and be very responsive to both of those. This event is being recorded and will be shared with everyone who registered for this summit session. So even if you have to jump halfway, you will receive a full recording of today's event. The Taproot team is also live tweeting this event using the hashtag PBSummit21. You should see that hashtag reflected on the slides as we move through. So if you'd like to join the conversation with us via Twitter, please feel free to do so. We would encourage it. So with that, I am delighted to pass things over to my colleague, Joshua Grohl, who's gonna dive into the content.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, I'm Josh. I'm the Customer Success Manager here at the Taproot Foundation. I recognize some of you in the guest list who are Taproot Plus users. I think we might have interacted. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into talking about just nonprofit boards in general, and also figuring out, if you're just starting out as a nonprofit, or maybe you have some questions about how to get your board firing on all cylinders, as I like to say. I just want to present some kind of high level basics about board service with nonprofits, but also how pro bono plays into board service, and how you can hopefully create a board that's powered by pro bono, as we like to say. So that'll be kind of what I'm going to talk about. Then I'll pass it over to our panelist. So we kind of start with the question that Kim was talking about earlier, of is your board an underutilized resource? So again, like Kim was saying, boards are often, from our perspective, a place where we see that nonprofits sometimes struggle with really kind of creating the kind of optimal board, or having board members that like totally understand what their role is and things like that. So I just want to kind of present, like I said, some high level ideas about nonprofit boards, how they run, and kind of what a functioning nonprofit board usually looks like. I know this is very diverse. There's a lot of different boards, a lot of different sizes of nonprofits, different board models. So there is no one size fits all solution necessarily, but in general, these are kind of what things look like, what best practices are for boards, and kind of how boards work. So I'll go ahead and dive into what does a high functioning nonprofit board look like usually. So like I said, there are many different models for board organization out there. There's the advisory board model, things like that. I know that's kind of a model that I believe Barbara, one of our panelists, is an advisory board member. But in general, nonprofit boards will need to have a member or members and committees that specialize or focus on these practice areas. So technology, marketing, HR, strategy. Indeed, Taproot's own board is structured similar to this. We are a nonprofit ourselves. So we understand where nonprofits are coming from in many ways. And you can see the types of issues that board members working in these areas are usually focusing on. Each one of these 4 practice areas is a place that pretty much all nonprofits intersect with in some way, shape, or form. So you could take the time to look at some of those bullets of the different types of duties and issues that each one of those board members or committees that you'll usually have on a board are tackling. So if you're a nonprofit just starting out or looking to revamp your current board, you'll about board recruitment with these practice areas in mind. Like I said, each of these 4 buckets represents crucial organizational components of any given nonprofit. Additionally, boards should aim to be diverse in both skills and backgrounds. So more and more, we're seeing funders, donors, and philanthropic organizations take interest in nonprofits board composition. So they'll ask, does your board include members that reflect the community you serve? Are your board members mostly from the same background or have the same skill sets? And with the expanding importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the nonprofit and corporate world, your board should aim to be diverse in background and skill set if possible. And making your board powered by pro bono, as we like to say, can actually help in that regard. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in the next few slides. But the really important takeaway, one of the important takeaways here is that nonprofit boards should focus on governance, advising, coaching. Your executive director or CEO or the leader of your organization leads, and then the staff at your organization, people like Kim and I, are executing all of the things that your organization are doing. Board members usually should not be assisting in day-to-day management or running of the nonprofit necessarily, unless your executive director or CEO is also a member of the board, and sometimes that intersects. But for the most part, board members are kind of involved in more kind of high-level decision-making, advising, and coaching, and governing the organization. And most importantly, I think you should always understand that every board member in general should be expected to raise resources, financial or otherwise, for the nonprofit. So every board member usually should be comfortable making some kind of commitment like this. So this is an area in particular where we found that a lot of boards are underutilized in terms of resource raising, whether it be financial resources or otherwise. So I've dropped the phrase resource raising. So I kind of want to talk about what that means a little bit and what that means for boards in particular. So you see some kind of a breakdown of all the various types of resources that your organization can have. So we generally encourage nonprofits to pivot from traditional thinking of fundraising alone to the broader idea of this phrase of resource raising. So as you can see, financial support is just one type of support your nonprofit is getting. It's obviously incredibly important, but also consider that all these other things have a monetary value attached to them as well. And that factors into your bottom line if you're a nonprofit leader. If you're a prospective board member, this is also great to keep in mind. Many nonprofit board members understand that they are expected to fundraise or contribute a certain level of financial support to the nonprofit themselves. But getting your board to think holistically in terms of resource raising allows you to be more nimble and economic in how you build capacity at your organization. The more you think about securing in-kind donations and pro bono consulting services, the more financial resources you will have free for other needs. So one important thing to call out here by expanding your definition of how board members can be looked at to bring in resources, you can also break the mold of who traditionally gets to sit on a nonprofit board. So too often we see nonprofits with large fundraising or donation requirements from board members. And this is not really an inclusive requirement and typically favors people who have benefited from generational wealth and privilege and things like that. So however, if instead you start looking at the skills a professional can bring into your organization or the pro bono engagements that they could strategize and secure on your behalf, then that opens the door to folks who might have been formally been closed out of nonprofit board service. And ultimately, your organization will benefit from having more diverse, knowledgeable, and qualified people with a seat at the table. And again, that later point that we're making here, this is something that funders and donors are tracking more and more, is the actual composition of the board and who's on the board. So very, very important to consider resource raising and getting your board in the mindset of resource raising. So carrying on from resource raising, I do want to talk a little bit about that monetary value. Because that is kind of an important carryover to board requirements. So I mentioned previously that all those resources do have a monetary value, and Taproot has partnered with CECP, which is Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, to calculate the average hourly rate of pro bono service across professional area and skill level, with a total weighted average of $195 for an hour of pro bono services. And you can see here, they break it down a little bit further by skill level and the professional area of service. And you can check out the entire report at CECP's website. The latest report we ran calculating these values is relatively recent, from 2019. And understanding resource raising and the value of pro bono services is one of the critical ways your board can become powered by pro bono. So more specifically, nonprofits can do this by integrating pro bono services into their what's called the give-get stipulation for board members. So backing up a little bit, the give-get for a board member is essentially the monetary value each board member promises to bring into the organization, either from a direct donation out of their own funds, that's the give, or from their own fundraising efforts. They can also generate monetary value. So that's the get, right? So every board member usually should be expected to commit to some kind of give-get. The give-get is critical, obviously, because it helps raise the funds your organization needs to keep the lights on, obviously, but also because prospective corporate funders and donors like to see commitment and investment from nonprofit board members in the nonprofits they support. And it signals that the nonprofit leadership is invested, quite literally, in this case, in the success of the nonprofit, and is in general a sign of overall nonprofit health. allowing board members to count the monetary value of pro bono resources they bring in against their give-get, or requiring that a certain percentage of their give-get be pro bono resources is a great way to capacity build and also economize at the same time. For example, let's say the head of your board's tech committee is able to source a Salesforce expert to get you set up, implement, and train the necessary staff to use Salesforce. The engagement will have a market value of thousands of dollars that you otherwise would have had to have spent. But also the multiplier effect of an engagement like that can easily generate more monetary value than the board member's actual give-get requirement, since you're probably using Salesforce to manage corporate donors and potential prospects to bring in more revenue. Further, going back to my previous point about board diversity in terms of skill and background, making pro bono resources a part of the give-get can allow you to recruit board members that have the skills, background, and experience you most need, but might not be able to make the financial commitment that's requisite in a traditional give-get requirement. So this is how making your board powered by pro bono, as we like to say, can also help in any DEI initiatives that your organization might be pursuing in the future. So I do now also want to transition a little bit and talk about an extra way you might want to think about pro bono service in respect to your board if you are a nonprofit, and if you are a skilled volunteer professional who's looking to get on a board. This is a really good thing to think about as potentially bringing as a skill set to a nonprofit board. If we want to take things further here, we encourage dedicating potentially an entire board position to pro bono resources. So if you're a professional interested in joining a nonprofit board, like I said, consider this another area of expertise you might be able to help in. This is a board member who will help the nonprofit secure, coach, and champion pro bono resources and projects on behalf of the organization. And always keeping in mind that the day-to-day running of the pro bono engagement itself will ultimately be handled by the nonprofit staff. So you can see here kind of in this helpful breakdown, both the board member and nonprofit staff are kind of responsible for crafting the scope, but each of them are going to be responsible for different aspects of any pro bono projects that result from the efforts of the staff member and the board member. The staff member is kind of going to oversee the day-to-day running of the project with the pro bono provider. They're going to kind of manage it day to day and then scale the engagement as necessary. Whereas again, the board members handling kind of the more high level things like securing the actual resources. And so, for example, maybe you want to pitch a consulting firm for a donation of pro bono services or in-kind donations, something like computers or software, things like that. This is a board member who could help you actually craft that pitch and make the ask, possibly tapping into their own networks, which is something that is very valuable or a valuable asset nonprofit board members bring to their nonprofits is their networks and being able to tap into those networks. So that's the type of thing that a whole position dedicated to pro bono service on a board can do in terms of resource raising. So I want to break this down a little bit more and show you how we've identified 6 ways in which a board member can create pro bono value for their organization. So a good thing to do is, and again, this applies to someone who's maybe heading up pro bono resources on the nonprofit board specifically, but this could also apply to any nonprofit board member, we think. So we advise for you to think like you would think if you were a treasurer, and that means co-owning your area of professional expertise with a staff member assigned by playing an advisory role. So we expect every board treasurer to work closely with staff on organizational finances. And you should do the same if it's an HR, marketing strategy, or information technology need, or any other area. And remember, always don't forget that this is an advisory role. Boards advise and govern, and chief executives lead, staff members execute. We also recommend building board literacy with the rest of the board members. So educate the rest of the board if possible on your own business area, Why does brand or talent development, for example, matter for the nonprofit? You can also play an interpreter role here a bit, translating marketing, HR, or other jargon into something that the rest of the board might be able to understand and appreciate. We recommend partnering with the chief executive to forecast pro bono needs and scope pro bono projects. So as an advisor, board members can help identify and anticipate organizational needs in their areas of expertise. In forecasting needs, nonprofit executives and board members can develop an infrastructure building plan in an organizational area. And once needs are identified, you can work together to scope specific pro bono projects to meet the need identified. You want to help recruit resources. So again, this is a way in which a lot of boards are underutilized. Board members have to tap into their networks and make the ask. So you're better positioned as a potential board member than anyone else by using your social capital to source the project from within your own professional network in many cases. So the board members, like I said in the example earlier, of using a board member to make the ask of a firm or something like that. And we'll also get into a little bit more later in the presentation on how to use our own resources at Taproot to do that. And then we also recommend you advise on management. So feel free to check in on projects that you've helped set up and advise the chief executive or staff as needed. And number 6 is what we call a stretch goal. If you really want to go above and beyond, try to champion what we call the pro bono ethic in what you're doing and instill it into your organization. So whenever a need surfaces, ask, is there another way to do this? And if you can influence your board to think about resources through the lens of pro bono service, that would have a huge impact on the organization. And we always recommend at the very end that we'd like to drive home. Managing the day-to-day of the project is something that the board members usually aren't doing. Remember, a board member's role is to advise and govern, and let the chief executive lead, let staff members execute. They'll appreciate your support, but they usually don't appreciate micromanagement. So that is just a very good best practice to think about. Now we know fully well that sometimes board members are engaged with a nonprofit on that level. And sometimes that's necessary. But generally, we try, if a nonprofit board, a nonprofit in general are functioning kind of at optimally, we try to keep those roles and responsibilities delineated. So I'm going to now pass it over to our wonderful panelists. I'll stop talking and I'll let you hear about their perspective in engaging in board service.
Great, thank you so much, Josh. So I am delighted to introduce Taproot's guest speakers for this summit event, Gloria Liu and Barbara Bella. So quick introductions for them both before I'll ask that they unmute themselves. So Gloria Liu is the Director of Finance and the Archbishop of Roridan High School in San Francisco. Her pronouns are she, her, hers. And she, in addition to her role as Director of Finance, also is a board member for the Golden Gate Philharmonic, which is a nonprofit focused on getting children educated and engaged in the arts through music. And she's been with the nonprofit for about 2 years, originally introduced to them through a Taproot pro bono project as a skilled volunteer herself. So really excited to hear more from Gloria. Introductions for Barbara Bella, our other great panelists today. So Barbara is also joining us from San Francisco, pronouns she, her, hers. She was formerly the owner and director of a publisher's rep firm, but in retirement, she's now super involved throughout the nonprofit space, working with a couple different great organizations, even acting as a chef for one of them, she shared before this event. So Barbara is a woman of many talents. So she has spent 20 years with Golden Gate Philharmonic, and now is on the advisory board. but has acted throughout her term with them as a chairperson and officer at various points, but has been retired and stepped away for the past 2 years or so. So with that, I'll ask both of you ladies to unmute yourself so we can start this panel conversation. So these questions that I'm going to pose to both Gloria, Barbara, and Josh, when relevant, came from our attendees at today's event. So thank you for everyone who submitted questions when you signed up for this webinar. We used those and kind of chose the top ones that came in, and that's what our panelists are going to go through. But I do want to mention we are saving some time at the end of the presentation for additional Q&A. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try and answer it at the very end. So keep that in mind and you drop them in the chat box or use the Q&A function to ask additional questions. All right, so my first question is how can our nonprofit leverage the skills of board members to fill our organizational needs? This was by far the top requested question from folks on the line today. And I actually want to direct it to Gloria, first of all, because Gloria, you have such an interesting perspective on this question specifically because of your experience acting as a volunteer who then became a nonprofit board member. And I'm curious if you use your finance skills now in your capacity with Golden Gate Philharmonic.
Good, yeah. I can't believe Josh. First, thank you to have me today, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Kimberly mentioned, currently I serve as a treasurer at the GGP, and this is the first time GGP have the professional to serve that role. So I do want to demonstrate how important to utilize the skill of the board member to fill the organization's lead. So oftentimes, so due to the lack of the accurate financial data, the board cannot make a good decision about the program and cannot measure the performance of their organization. So I utilized my expertise to kind of implement some the details, the procedure. For example, we implement the budget and versus actual. And every month I present the financial statement to the board, kind of walk through the number, give them kind of clear picture where we are regarding our the financial standards. And I also have implemented the forecasting, which is also very important, especially for the small and medium-sized nonprofit. Oftentimes, the revenue, could be coming not evenly, meaning we, like GGP, we collect tuition at the very beginning school year. And then during the course of the year, the revenue kind of, decline, but our expenses still continue to be every month. We have the incurred expenses. So forecasting is very important to make sure end of the school year, we didn't burn any cash. So with those kind of the expertise I present to the board, really help the board make the good decision, make the data-driven decision to know where we are by any given point. And with that picture also help the team to kind of have the strategic plan, the long-term plan, not just the only focus on the daily operation. We also can kind of narrow down in future years to the plan. So I do think really important to have the board member utilize their specialized to make a valuable contribution for the board role. Yes.
Yeah, I loved a lot of what you brought up there, especially around, yes, you were able to deliver and are able to deliver these very tactical wins for the organization by leveraging your finance skills, like with the forecasting and working out the budget, but also bring these tactical elements and roll them up into the strategic planning process. And how do we turn this right now solution and build it into our structure or build it into our policies and our strategies moving forward, which is now in your position as a board member, you have the purview where you can make sure that those best practices are built in. Sorry, go ahead.
one benefit of that is also, the board member can really kind of bring the different the mindset. Like I always mentioned, we are the nonprofit, but my mindset is we run the nonprofit like we run the business. So we still need to focus on our bottom line, right? So I think all that kind of perception and the mindset also, help the board to shape. Yeah.
Yeah. Barbara, I see you clamoring, so I'm going to turn things over to you.
I wanted to add, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank Taproot for helping us find Gloria. So that's been a tremendous way for us to have our very first professional running one of the areas that we seek to address from the board level. One of the things I wanted to add to this is that when we have anybody join the board, they're joining for a 2 or 3 year term. And so at any moment in time, this tends to be a rolling and rotating years. So you're constantly looking for what are the skill sets, what are the talents, what are the professional expertise that we are lacking and needing, so that as we seek bringing members on, we're trying to fill the holes or the gaps that we actually have on the board at any moment in time. So while we have always had to have somebody running finance, this is the first time that the Golden Gate Philharmonic GGP Youth Orchestra has had a professional. But regardless of that, what we're always trying to do is match skill set with need.
I really like that. And it does lead me to my next question, another really hot topic in the registration questions we received, which was around how do organizations know, how do nonprofit leaders know when to elevate a volunteer, whether it's someone they've worked with on maybe hands-on volunteering or a pro bono partner that they've worked with. How do they know when to elevate them to a board member position? Because as Barbara, you were saying, like, how do you know when it's the right time to kind of carve out the skill set specialty? And so with that question, I want to turn things to Gloria again, because this is really what happened with you when you were introduced to GGP originally as a volunteer.
Yes, so I started with a volunteer to help the GGP fill the tax return. So I do believe in that the project I demonstrate very strong professional qualification, and also show my attitude. So the side note, when I volunteer, I never think about the board seat and all. I just want to contribute my expertise, right? So, but I think after the project, I definitely meet with the great people from the GGP, and then together, I think they feel my attitude, my my value and my expertise really kind of fit with the GGP's mission. And then they actually, it's the GGP present that the board said the opportunity to me, and then I said, after I look at, and I think it's really fit my expertise, and I also want to make it's a commitment. I do want to emphasize, as long as you decided to go to the board, it is the commitment. You have to be ready, because you have to contribute your time, your energy, your expertise to really add value to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And Barbara, would love to hear your perspective on this as well.
That's great. So what I would like to add is that when I first started, I started at GGP because I enrolled my daughter in the music education program. I immediately became a volunteer. And what happened is, as I volunteered in the organization, I immediately started to see and value the mission of the organization. And what happened is that the chair of the board at that time noticed that. And that sort of led to this idea of what you are looking for. Everything that Gloria just spoke about, her good attitude, her commitment, time to commit, expertise. What we then started to do is, and I did join the board, and I co-authored with the chair of the board at the time, a document that helped us tap into some best practices, because we are really a mom and pop board. This is an organization that has been led by the founder, a retired music teacher. And so this was a hands-on board where we were doing everything from preparing snacks to figuring out how to collect the tuition to figuring out, how to deal with faculty, every consideration in running the organization. So how did we try to think about who we should invite when we started to see volunteers really gearing up and caring? And so what we uncovered in investigation of other more mid-sized, more well-funded organizations, we started to look at what are they doing to attract board members, and when did they elevate their volunteers? So we started to identify alignment with the values of the organization, availability of time to contribute their work and their wisdom, effective service as an ambassador, and as Josh spoke about earlier, their willingness to provide or support our fundraising efforts, contribute what they can financially if they can. Purity of motive, which is very important. That's one of the things that I know we're going to talk later about dynamics on boards, but if you don't have purity of motive, things can go really haywire. Ability to separate personal interests from the best interests of the organization. So if we see a volunteer that's super active because they're really supporting and are interested in just their child's experience, that's not going to be a volunteer that we necessarily going to want to elevate to the board, because that volunteer is going to be maybe gone tomorrow if their child is no longer participating, or they're going to start to try to influence decision-making based on things that are serving only their own child, as opposed to the benefit and well-being of all the children. Ability to maintain confidentiality and being mindful of boundaries. And finally, and really crucial, something that is hard to determine, but essential because of its ability to turn things upside down, is the ability to work constructively with the board and the community. Because you don't want personality to start to influence anything in a negative way, because if everybody has different needs and demands and interests. And so being able to work in harmony is so crucial to the success of the organization, so that you have a positive, happy organization as opposed to one that has toxicity.
Yeah, I love the inclusion of working in harmony with the organization and the community.
Yes.
Because when we think of a nonprofit board, it really should, in order to be effective, one of the things we named right off the top of the bat during this presentation was it should be representative of the community that you're serving. They are your end users. They are who your mission is, driving towards helping or supporting or uplifting in some way. And so
Yes.
Working in harmony with the community, just love that. Want to put a +1 by it. So Barbara, I want to have you address those recommendations for creating healthy board dynamics a little bit more. But first, I'm going to give Josh and Gloria some homework to do in the chat while you are thinking about the dynamic side of things. Josh and Gloria, if you could throw some tips in the chat for finding qualified board members, and if anyone on the line has online resources or links they want to share with fellow attendees, please feel free. Let's get some resource sharing going on in the chat around tips or places or recruiting avenues that you've personally used for finding qualified board members. All right, so with that homework assigned, I'm going to turn back to Barbara because I would love to hear more about these recommendations or tips or advice you have for folks on creating and then maintaining healthy board dynamics.
So I would say we would start with making sure that all board members that are aware of the criteria that was thought about by the board itself, because sometimes people are invited on the board and they don't even know that the reasons that they were selected were not only because of their area of expertise, but because they demonstrate a purity of motive, because they seem to be able to work well and play with each other, play nicely with the group, because they really do have an alignment with the values and because they're interested. So making sure that they all know that. Also, read the bylaws. So organizations are directed by the bylaws. And so if your board members are not conversant and understand the bylaws right out of the gate, you're going to have people that are not able to sit together at a meeting to be able to understand where the organization, what's grounding this organization, what are the rules of engagement. And so once they join the board, understanding why they were invited, making sure they're familiar with the basic laws, the bylaws of the organization are crucial. In addition to that, I think it's important for any nonprofit board to establish what are the expectations. So when a board member joins, do they know what's expected of them? Do they know that they were tapped because they have a marketing expertise and the board is going to look to them not only for their own wisdom about marketing, but perhaps that board is going to look to them for tapping into their colleagues. Well, maybe they wouldn't have joined the board if they thought, oh, gee, they're going to expect me to ask my colleagues for help. I don't want to go there. Well, that expectation should already have been vetted before they are finally approved to join the board. So understanding expectations before the person has accepted the role to join the board is so important. And for that, the board itself has to know what the expectations are. So when the board is making decisions, who are going to be inviting to join the board this year for the coming fiscal year? Okay, we need technology assistance. What kind of technology assistance? What do we expect them to be able to do? What kind of time commitment does this require? Do we expect them to tap into their friends? If all of those sorts of things are understood prior to the agreement to join the board, and then the person accepts that agreement, that's going to allow for so much smoother sailing. When we don't do that, I've seen collision courses. I've served on the GGP board on and off over the 20 years. I've been an officer, a director, as well as the chair of the board at various times. And we've had various levels of doing what I'm describing, practicing what we're preaching. And the better boards, the years where we've had more success have definitely been when all of the group has understood what's expected of them. And as I say, if we've done well in vetting the very first part that I've just previously shared about playing well in the sandbox, we're good.
Yes, absolutely. Josh, I actually want to call on you because I feel like some of the expectation setting when it comes to roles and responsibilities of distinct board member positions that Barbara was just referring to kind of aligns with some of what you were introducing earlier when it came to board focus areas that a nonprofit could choose to invest in or focus in. So I want to see if you have any thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, I think, going back to the information I presented about the different areas, those are very general because those are kind of the four main areas that all nonprofits have a stake in at any given time. But like I said, each nonprofit is going to be different. Your nonprofit might actually decide to privilege one of those areas or the other, depending on what your gaps are, what your pain points might actually be at your organization, what you choose to actually emphasize in terms of role. And I think just from our panelists here, you've seen that there is a diversity in like the types of roles that happen or that occur on a board. My main, I think, advice there would be, instead of we have to have somebody for this role, we have to have somebody for that role, we have to have somebody for this role, is just make sure that you're being very intentional in the roles that you're actually recruiting for. Not necessarily because you think that, well, this is what we have to have because all nonprofit boards have this. But again, where those gaps, where those pain points might be, always kind of go, I think, for what makes sense for your organization. Also keeping an eye on potential gaps that you might not know about or areas of growth. But I would say start there. There's, like I said, there's a lot of different models and things you can look at and take from online. Again, those might not necessarily make the most sense for your organization. So keep that in mind.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to be cognizant of time, and we have a few other pieces of content we want to get through, and we want to save a few minutes at the end for some Q&A, because I know I've seen a few other questions come in. So I just want to say thank you to our panelists and ask that you stick around in case we have any questions directed at you all during Q&A. But thanks so much.
Can I also just quickly say thank you to Taproot, because Golden Gate Philharmonic has benefited from probably 100 hours of volunteer expertise that has made such a difference in our organization.
All credit goes towards volunteers like
Yes.
Gloria,
Yes.
who so generously donate their time and expertise. So we're just happy to be the connectors.
Very good.
Thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
I also wanted to say thank you as well, because I think the Taproot is a bridge to really connect between the volunteer and the nonprofit organization. And I also, from my experience, I think it's a win-win situation, because from the volunteer perspective, yes, I contribute my time, my expertise, but I also learn a lot from the great people from GGP and also from the Taproot Foundation. So it's definitely a win-win situation. I also appreciate the opportunity. I have the opportunity to serve in the GGP. It's also helped me to continue to grow up. So thank you both.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's reflected here in your great quote. So we appreciate all of your time as a volunteer and now serving at a great organization. So with that, I'm actually going to pass the mic back over to Josh, because I know he has some other helpful content he wants to dig into before we open things up for Q&A.
Yeah. So I know we've talked about board service a lot. I do want to give you some information about how you could potentially start using pro bono resources to build and develop a nonprofit board. So without further ado, we can jump right in there. And obviously our first thought here at the Taproot Foundation is don't be afraid of using nonprofit resources, or sorry, pro bono resources to build out your board. And board development is truly a nonprofit HR challenge. It's a human resources challenge. It falls under that bucket. Oftentimes we don't think of it necessarily as a human resources challenge, but that is ultimately what it is. We often see nonprofits hesitate to bring in external support because they don't think that board work is such a unique nonprofit issue. While nonprofit boards are very, very unique, that doesn't mean you can't apply private sector skills from pro bono providers to helping you plan for, recruit, coach, and evaluate your own organization's board. So I want to kind of arm you with just a few pro bono project recommendations. If you are thinking about sourcing pro bono resources to help with board recruitment specifically. So these are the types of various project recommendations that you can engage in to kind of get your board up and running, or maybe if you're having some problems with your board. I've seen some questions come in about, some of our board members kind of just show up to meetings. They aren't as engaged as they maybe used to be. Expectations aren't clear, things like that. These are various types of projects that I think could help with that. So board recruitment strategy is kind of very high level and obvious. A strong nonprofit board of directors can help guide employees through internal challenges, react and respond to external factors, and build strong systems to withstand future challenges. So you can partner with an experienced HR professional to craft a strategy for recruiting board members with the exact skills, experience, and social capital to be an asset in ordinary and extraordinary times. So that strategy should include a plan for how to set expectations with board candidates on the ways that they will be called upon when it comes to fundraising, HR, and other management activities. The other type of thing, I'll call out, one or two more of these projects. Board effectiveness audit. For this group in particular, I think that's something that might be important. So we found that many boards don't step back and actually review their own performance a lot of times, which can lead to stagnation. Though employees never go long without having their performance assessed. It's not a part of most boards' traditions, and it can feel like another time sink in an already limited time. With the already limited time nonprofit boards have to work together. But if your board can't identify how well they're doing or what's getting in the way of improved performance, they have no way of knowing how to actually fix it. So you can't fix what you don't know about. An effective board review is done at regular intervals and includes everything from current board composition to the performance of individual directors to the performance of the board as a whole. So one more project I'd really like to call out, especially based on the questions we've seen come in, is leadership coaching project. Prepare your staff and leaders and board members specifically for managing effectively in difficult situations by investing in their own professional development. You can consult with coaches skilled in areas such as change management, remote team oversight, building or maintaining organizational culture, and more. This is really also crucial for board members who might not be comfortable evangelizing, so to speak, or selling the organization, or making the ask, like we were talking about earlier, people who are maybe reticent to go into situations with funders and really pitch the organization. That type of coaching, if you have board members who have great skills and experience that you still want to retain, but maybe they're a little bit wary of dipping your toes into the water of being a good fundraiser for the organization, that can be fixed. Those people can be coached in ways to do that. So that's another type of project you could work on that's very specific to boards. And then we also have these other projects here to think about. So now I do want to talk a little bit about just the nuts and bolts of sourcing pro bono assistance if you want to engage with pro bono providers on projects. So some of you, I think, are already familiar with Taproot Plus or know about it. I know some of you, I think, are already in the system. So we designed Taproot Plus to try and be flexible and nimble so nonprofits can get linked up with skilled volunteers, no matter how big they are. And any business professionals can support said nonprofit, no matter where they are. And obviously it's completely free to use. So currently Taproot Plus is open to business professionals and nonprofits, public schools, and fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the United States. We're also available in the UK, the EU, and India currently. Hopefully we're able to expand geographically more so. Again, Taproot Plus is completely free to use. And we essentially view it as a marketplace you could go to pitch projects to a pool of pro bono providers and get linked up with them to see if they'd be able to help you out on some of these projects that you might want to embark on in terms of expanding your board or doing that kind of leadership coaching or any of the projects we just talked about. So I also just want to talk really quick about the two types of engagements you can use Taproot Plus for. So you can use Taproot Plus for full-on projects. So like those examples that we were talking about earlier, like board recruitment or leadership coaching. You can post those projects on Taproot Plus, on the Taproot Plus marketplace. We work to boost those projects out. Projects, as the name would imply, come, with deliverables. You usually work with a skilled volunteer over anywhere from 3 to 9 weeks, or maybe even a bit more, to finish a deliverable together. The other option is consultation sessions. These are one-off 1-hour calls that you can conduct with a pro bono provider. And these are great for diagnosing problems, brainstorming, or actually helping scope out potential projects that you want to try and secure resources for down the line. So again, those are 1-hour, one-off calls, a bit different from those projects. You're not really going to be creating or finishing a deliverable together. These are consultative. Those are the two options you can use on Taproot Plus. Keep in mind, we are actually going to, we're in the middle of revamping our sessions offering to make it a bit more intuitive and just the experience better. So keep that in mind. The next month or two, we'll be sending out an update about that. So just really quick, if you do decide to post a project, this is kind of what it looks like when it goes up on the marketplace. You can see your basic information for your nonprofit, the project overview. Under that, your mission and vision are always going to be up there. Maybe a volunteer comes over from LinkedIn. We have a partnership with LinkedIn that allows us to cross-post projects there as well. They get to a project page that looks like this, and they say, I think I'm going to sign up and reach out to this organization. So that's kind of what the process looks like. We'll try and get you in touch with them and set up a call between you two if you're interested in their skills and experience and think they might be a good fit for the project. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of Taproot Plus. And we'll go ahead and close out with Q&A. I know we've gotten a lot of really great questions in the questions box and kind of throughout in the chat. So Kim, I don't know if you have some eyes on some questions that you want to pitch to us first. I could start reading through what I see. I tried to kind of gear some of those responses to questions I was seeing in the chat since we're running up on time here. But let me know what we might want to prioritize.
Yes, thanks so much, Josh. And thanks so much for everyone who's been submitting questions. It looks like we'll go like maybe 2 or 3 minutes over, but if you do have to jump, please feel free. If we don't answer your question live, we'll follow up via email personally with you to make sure you get those answers you need. So Josh, why don't you take it away with one of the questions you've already identified and kind of have compiled thoughts around?
Yeah, so one of the Julie Leon, sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, asked a really good question about what advice do you have for boards or organizations that have like one part-time employee? So the board is helping doing a lot of the day-to-day work. You know, this sounds, without knowing the exact details of this nonprofit, sounds like, you know, a nonprofit that is kind of starting out or interested in trying to grow. Yeah, this is really interesting because I think this is an area in which setting very clear goals with the board of, you know, we're here, we need to get, you know, we're at point A, we need to get to point B. Let's say, you know, in the next year and a half, we want to have 2 full-time people working at the organization or things like that. Goal setting sounds very kind of simple and obvious, but it can oftentimes be overlooked when you're kind of running around playing whack-a-mole with all the day-to-day tasks that you're desperately trying to do to keep the organization afloat. Sitting back and actually discussing that high-level strategy of, okay, how can we get into a position where we don't feel like we're playing whack-a-mole and our board members can actually start doing what board members are really supposed to be doing if we kind of have the ideal board that we're shooting for. Taking a step back and saying, you know, we maybe want to recruit board members that are very good at making an ask, because right now we need financial resources to actually fund full-time positions at this organization. So that's what we need to prioritize. Maybe you try and link up with someone who's good at board recruitment, who can create the exact type of profiles of the types of people that you're looking for, so that you have very targeted and direct outreach. So I know I mentioned in the comments about, you know, kind of just hitting up people like through professional online networks like LinkedIn. You'd be surprised at how approachable some people can be. Again, a pro bono professional who's good at board recruitment can help you really tailor and make that ask very intentional to that person. You don't want to waste your time looking for people to join your board that might not really be a good fit, and there's a lot of people out there. So you want to be able to drill down on that. So obviously for a nonprofit like Julie's, like resource raising with funds in particular to be able to fund those full-time positions to kind of create a separation between the day-to-day needs and the actual board governance, I think is crucial. I was interested though, Barbara, I'm not sure if, you know, it sounds like your you know, you all were doing in a situation very similar to Julie's. So I was wondering if you had any comments about this as well, because you almost described a very similar kind of a situation. Well, Barbara, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you. What I would add to this is that when you are an organization that is that lean and you don't have a lot of resources, you can't actually just go out and do the ask. You have to also establish your value to the community. Because, for example, at Golden Gate Philharmonic Youth Orchestra, the reason why people would support it is because they say, wow, There's 100 children from all over the Bay Area that are going to learn how to play a string instrument. If we don't have those families going, wow, my kid's getting a great experience. This has made a difference. Because this child was able to do this, they're now able to do that. In other words, establish that we are fulfilling our mission in the community. Because if you're not also paying attention that the board is making sure that the organization is fulfilling its mission, there isn't any ability to get the money to scale up. We have always struggled with this because we are always turning to the families that are sending their children to the organization to pay the tuition and then turn around and ask them to provide additional, come to our auctions, come to our fundraiser. So we're trying to get money from the same people. So we desperately work on how can we define corporate grants? How can we get money from foundations? Grants are very hard because you have to be very large and you have to be able to scale. Foundations can support whoever they want to support. And so we have to be able to do both of those things. So your board can never stop looking at, are you fulfilling your mission while you're trying to find money to scale up?
Thanks so much, Barbara, for Josh, for chiming in on those. I think we have time for one more question. And again, if we didn't get to your question in the chat, someone from the Taproot team will follow up with you personally to make sure you get those answers. But there was one that came in that, Gloria, I really want to get your perspective on. And it was around, how do you get board members to commit time in the midst of their own lives and busy schedules? I imagine that maybe this issue was heightened during the pandemic, especially. So from your perspective as a current board member, how do you address non-engaged board members or the ones who maybe only show up to meetings but don't really do anything in between?
Yes, so as Barbara mentioned, so when the board recruit the board member, they should deliver the clear expectation to let the perspectives that the board member understand it is a huge commitment. So you have to really step in and make effort to help this nonprofit. So we do understand everyone right now is really busy, have the multiple tasks. So I do want to emphasize from the volunteer perspective, as long as you want to take that role, you have to tell yourself you are serious to serve this organization. And as long as you are in this organization, I think the time management will be really important. So yes, so you really need to balance between your daily life and your volunteer as a board. So my advice it is a time management will be very important. Also communication. I think the board is a whole team. We need to collaborate, right? So if we have the problem, so we have the issues, we always come together and we discuss and say, is any perspective the other team member can kind of lend their hand to me. So I think in general, it's a teamwork. So everyone contributes their expertise to move forward. But individually, my advice it is you take that seriously, and also your time management, your skills to balance. Yes, I do think as long as you take that role, you have to be prepared to sacrifice some kind of free time for sure. Like right now, I probably I have to, for example, I have to maintain the QuickBooks for the GGP. It is the work. So and also again, I want to also anchor the Barbara's also another character when they want to recruit the board member is that the value, and you have to really your value to kind of resonate the organization's value. Then you have that same kind of mission, same one like a common goal to achieve. That also will really kind of like a mission driven for yourself. You wanted to take that role. Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, Barbara, quick rapid fire question for you. I know I said Gloria's was the last one, but we've been getting a lot of questions around like average board commitment on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis. And given your 20-year experience with nonprofit boards, wondering if you have a quick answer you could share for that question specifically.
I'd say on average that if you're really participating, it can range anywhere from 3 to 10 hours a week.
Okay, great. All right, well, I want to say thank you again to our wonderful panelists and for everyone on the line who joined us and who stuck with us even though we ran a couple minutes over. We so appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be with the Taproot team. We loved having you as part of the 2021 US Pro Bono Summit. And we want to say thank you again to our summit's leadership sponsors, PwC and RBC, for their support in making this session possible and freely accessible to Taproot's community members across the board. So you will be hearing from Taproot shortly with the recording link and some of the other resources that we mentioned in the chat. So stay tuned for that email. And thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you online soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.